Tonight on Bayou Time, I'll be joined by the Vicar General of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, Father Mark Toups. We're going to talk about the diocese's role in meeting with some of the other diocesan organizations here in the state in the release of names dealing with sexual abuse here in the area over the years. It's been a national trend, but Father Mark Toups has been very transparent to this station in the past, and tonight has agreed to come on and talk about that in advance of the bishop appearing on HTV to release names, if any, whether they're in the past or if there are any new allegations. We'll find that out tonight. It's all next on Bayou Time.
Deep in the heart of the Bayou, we are gathered here tonight. Now it's time for action, 'cause our lives are on the line. Tonight we'll do our very best to break through all the bureaucratic mess. The time has come tonight, 'cause it's Bayou time. Show what Louisiana's all about.
Now, from the Eugene Folse Studios in Houma, here's Martin Folse.
Welcome back to a very special Bayou Time. I'm Martin Folse. Very tough Bayou Time tonight as we talk with the Vicar General of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, Father Mark Toups. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about his appearance tonight in advance of the bishops' meeting in Louisiana and across the nation on the topic of sexual abuse in the church. Very tough topic, but Father Mark has agreed to sit down with me and be candid about the local diocese and what is planned in the advancement of some of those names here in the area, keeping victims, of course, in mind all the time. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. And Father Mark, we appreciate you joining us tonight.
Absolutely, it's good to be here.
You know, me and you go way back.
Yep.
Our families intertwined. Your dad, my dad,
Yeah.
great friends.
Yep.
And it's always a tough subject, especially when I'm in the lay community. You're the Vicar General now, so you've climbed up way up, and you're a rock star in the Catholic Church. But the sexual abuse scandals that we've been hearing so much about in the news, and lately just skyrocketing, and it's on people's mind. We could go back, you know, with my recollection, being born in '60, hearing about it in the '70s, hear about it '80s, hear about it '90s, hear about it at the turn of the century, and it goes on and on. But I will say this, I appreciate you sitting down with me. You've been very transparent, and the bishop.
Absolutely.
Bishop Fobb has been very transparent, and y'all are ahead of the national trend of some names, ahead of the state. All the dioceses, I know, meeting soon to give names and put names out, but me and you talked. There's still a lot of victims who are watching tonight, who have moved on with their lives, who have families, who really, you don't want to have them say, here we go again. It's resurfacing. So it's a very tough subject. Let me give you the floor. I know it's been a tough subject for priests in general and the high ups in the Catholic Church in general.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's good to be here with you, and my hope is that we begin a conversation tonight that I think is going to probably continue over the next several months. Every family has difficult things in the family, and even inside my own family, a couple years ago, I learned that families are only as healthy as they have the courage to talk about the tough stuff. And no family is perfect. Certainly, the Catholic Church is not perfect, and we are only as healthy as we are able to talk about the tough stuff. And this is an unfortunate and dark chapter in the history of the Church. It's a sin that has been brought to light, and we're only as healthy as we are able to talk about the tough things. And so obviously people are talking about it, obviously people are thinking about it, obviously people have a variety of emotions about it, and there's nothing that we can talk about tonight that's going to take all that away, but we can start a conversation so that we can bring to light the things that need to be brought to the light. And I think that we can take a step in restoring trust. People's trust in the church has been affected by this, whether they are victims or whether they are Catholics or Christians or anybody who's watching the media. And so I think Bishop Fobb wants to begin the process of restoring trust. And I think that starts with a conversation.
And before we move on to talk on a local level, the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, I know you alluded to the fact the bishop is in meetings with the Louisiana bishops and not quite sure how that strategy will play out, whether the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux will release on their own or all together. That's still playing out, isn't it?
Absolutely. Archbishop Amon has mentioned publicly that the Louisiana bishops are going to be discussing amongst themselves how to respond, and Bishop Fobb certainly wants to consult with the other bishops about that. But ultimately, he cares about the people in our diocese and wants to do the right thing, and so we will await the consultation with the other Louisiana bishops and see where those conversations go.
All right, thanks, Father Mark. We'll take a short break. We'll be back a lot more. Don't go away. And welcome back to Bayou Time. Once again, my guest tonight is the Vicar General, the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, Father Mark Toups. In keeping the victims in mind, and I know we've talked, we want the victims out there who have been, I guess, the brunt of credible assaults, credible abuse, because a lot of people that come forward sometimes and there's no credibility to their story. And we've seen that in national news recently with Justice Kavanaugh, and there's still a big gray area. So let's take out the gray areas. We know that a few years back, Robert Melanson, and I won't call him father. I think he lost that privilege.
Sure.
Okay. Robert Melanson.
Sure.
Patrick Kajawa. We know those two are still in jail to this day for things that they did under the cloak of being a priest. First question, does that drive you crazy that you've chosen to be a priest? You put your heart and soul into being a priest. You live it. You're passionate. And for lack of a better word, you got a couple of knuckleheads out there that come in, use the church, hide under the church rules, and give the church a bad name.
Well, I don't think any priest entered the priesthood expecting the priesthood to be perfect. The first guy to choose priest was Jesus Christ himself, and 1 out of 12 actually betrayed him. And so I think every priest right now, as we are in conversations with people who are struggling with the abuse, as we are in obviously active prayer for any victim who's been affected by this, for their families, I think one of the questions that I've heard people talk about lately is about leaving the church. And I think every priest right now has to ask himself, why is he staying? And it's a different way to look at it. And you know, I stay because I love the Lord, and I stay because I love people, and I stay because I believe in the sacraments and I believe in what he has given us. But I don't stay because I expected it to be perfect, and I don't stay because I expected priests to be perfect. Now it's a sin, and what those two priests, as you mentioned, did was sinful and hurtful, and there's no excuse for it. My dad, when I was younger, reminded us all that there's a difference between an explanation and an excuse. And there is no excuse for priests who have been convicted of crimes. There's no excuse for priests who have sinned against people. There can be lots of explanations out there, but none of those take away the pain inside the hearts of the victims. And so I think for all the priests that are staying out there, they're doing the best that they possibly can. And there are a lot of great priests out there. So.
And that's, I think that's the hard part. We grew up, I mean, at my sister's class had a couple of priests. I mean, we surrounded by priests. We grow up, priests are our mentors growing up. And then the church gets a bad name. But, you know, over the years, like I said before, 70s, and I don't know why it's curtailed. Maybe the policies have changed, but I do know that I have not covered stories in the last several years of the magnitude that are covered in the first half of HTV's history.
Absolutely.
Why is that so?
I think there are two primary reasons for that. The first is the way that we screen candidates to go into the seminary to begin with. And the second is because of formal action by the church in 2002, which governs how the church responds to everything. So let me start with the latter and then we'll go to the former. In 2002, in response to the first time that everything broke with Boston and things like that, in 2002, all of the United States bishops gathered in Dallas. And they passed legislation, internal legislation, you might say, that governs how every diocese responds to any credible allegation to sexual abuse, and removed in that process the bishop as the sole decision maker. And so because of the Dallas Charter in 2002, every diocese is required to have a lay review board. We have one. In fact, Houma-Thibodaux has had one since 1996, even before the 2002 Dallas Charter. Our current lay review board is made up of people who have professional history in everything from investigation to law enforcement to social services. Our current lay review board has over 200 years of professional experience in those professions. And so in 2002, the U.S. bishops themselves said every bishop needs a lay review board, and any credible allegation has to go to them, and then they make the recommendation to the bishop.
Is that because they wanted to make sure that if a bishop indeed was bad or covering up something, it wouldn't just be solely the bishop's decision?
Absolutely. I think it was a desire for further transparency, to learn from the mistakes of the past. And so now the bishop has to listen to the recommendations. The bishop has to act on those. Bishop Fobb has done an incredible job of looking deep inside our heart and working with our lay review board. I know that he's committed to doing the right thing, but when you have a bishop who wants to do the right thing and you have the accountability with a diocesan review board, then you don't have the scandal and the cover-up that I think has come to light in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And so,
which leads me, I guess, to a tough question. Like I said, we covered news stories. I wouldn't say often, but periodically they would come up and everybody would go, not again. We're hearing it again. People would come to my office and we'd sit in there. I was sitting there with groups of parents sometimes, and they would tell me stories. And we'd go back to the Robert Melancon and the Kajawa cases and that type of thing. I'm not saying there was a lot in the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, probably a lot less if you see other cities across the nation releasing names. 1,000 from Pennsylvania, 100-something San Bernardino today. Any knowledge of any priest at this time in Houma-Thibodaux Diocese that would be under watch by you all at this time?
38 parishes in our diocese. We have 54 active priests who are actively involved in those parishes right now. And I can absolutely guarantee you that none of those priests that are active in our diocese right now have any allegation against them.
Okay. So now that the bishop's meeting with the other bishops, if they were to release something together, doesn't that sort of put the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux in a bad situation where maybe there might be a lot of names come out of a bigger city, but you don't want to get tied into them if your track record right now is pretty good? That's probably why you're sitting here. You got good news to report here, and you're ahead of the game. Why mess that up?
Because it's the right thing to do. It's important for people to hear that Bishop Fobb wouldn't consider releasing names because different organizations are putting pressure, and it's not that you release names because well, everybody else is doing it. You release names because it's the right thing to do. You act with integrity because it's important to act with integrity.
But you've always been, like I said, we have a close relationship over the years. You just sort of put it out there. You're like ahead of, and I know you probably have legal and everybody says, well, you might want to sit on that, but you've never been like that, because if there's nothing to hide, tell the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that as I listen to a lot of people who are struggling to trust a church right now, it's not merely the fact that there's been the grave sin of child sexual abuse. It's been their struggle with the cover-up. And so I think that if you're upfront with people, you acknowledge the sin that's there, but if you stay engaged in conversation intentionally ahead of the game, then it helps people at least trust the process. And I think it's been the cover-up and the lack of intentional conversation that has added to a lot of the frustration that's out there right now. So being intentional and reaching out to you is the only way to go.
Father Mark, I appreciate the candidness. We're going to take another short break, and we'll have some more questions for the Vicar General of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux right after a short break. And welcome back to Bayou Time, joined once again by the Vicar General of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, Father Mark Toups, as we continue our talk on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Years ago, people who may have had the tendency to get involved in that kind of behavior said, church is a good place I can sort of hide. They can no longer hide. Y'all have really toughened up the rules to get in to begin with.
Absolutely. So the screening process for a man who wants to enter into the seminary and eventually become a priest, the screening process is completely different now than it was in 2000, much less 1980 or 1970. So the type of psychological testing that's now mandatory for a man to go to the seminary is vastly different and much more thorough than it used to be.
So do y'all test for like pedophilia, or is there certain questions you ask where a pedophile might be saying, I can be around altar boys all the time? And you would tell me, what's the juvenile term that y'all use?
There's two different types of distinctions with those who abuse. There are those who are attracted to minors, to children, and there are those who are attracted to, you might say, adolescent males. Those are two different types of psychological profiles, or two different types of psychological problems. In our screening of our candidates for the seminary, every diocese is different. They have to do psychological screening on or this or that. But our diocese has been, for several years now, very intentional about making sure that we, in our psychological screening, are looking for all of those red flags.
You know, I remember picking up the paper the other day and reading about Jesuit. I had nephews that went to Jesuit. My brother-in-law went to Jesuit. It's a great institution. But back in the 70s, some horrible things went on, and nobody at Jesuit really knew about it, because the diocese didn't pay anybody off. The institution and some kind of side charter paid them off. So you have the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux.
Yep.
And then I'm sure you have some other charities on the side. To your knowledge, has any other charities been involved in any kind of payouts, you know, over the years, as far as you know?
We were established in 1970, so we are a little over 40 years old. I have no direct recollection of anything prior to our earlier founding, but I can guarantee you, since Bishop Fobb has been in this diocese, that has not been a part of what happens.
So you recently come on, so probably a little unfair in the fact that you don't know what other bishops did, because they all had legal and everything else. But as far as you know now, I know you've been in the forefront of it. Nothing has.
Absolutely not.
So when names come out, if they come out, I mean, we don't even know. Houma-Thibodaux Diocese, it's really not going to be a big news story, will it?
I don't think so. I mean, the names of people that you have already mentioned have already been publicly out there, and so as Bishop Fobb is in discernment with the other bishops about when to release those names or how to release those names, I don't think there's going to be any major surprises with the names that are on that list.
You know, and I got to be fair to Bishop Fobb too. He's a gentle person, and you got to know he hates going to these meetings and doing this. But he's sitting there, and I know you feel the same way. The victims who are out there and that are having to relive everything. And you know they have to be tense, thinking about the names that are going to come out, and they're going to relive that experience. And I said in the early part of the show, they've moved on with their life. Some of them are married. Some of them have 3 or 4 kids. They don't want to have to go in a room and say, son or daughter, sit down. Let me tell you what happened. So I guess my next question is this. If somebody's watching and they go, Martin, Father Mark, y'all missed one or y'all missed 2. This happened to me. We want to be very careful that the person watching has very credible. You just can't come up with my cousin told my cousin. Credible evidence to back the accusation. What would want to make them come forward, come meet with you, to make sure their name wasn't put out in the light, so to speak?
Here's the process. So our Victims Assistance Coordinator is specifically designated to help people like that. Any person who has a credible allegation to bring forward that they want to bring this to the light. We have a Victims Assistance Coordinator to help them with that. That conversation is available to them 24 hours a day, and you can run that telephone number on the bottom of the screen as you're editing this conversation. But Sister Carmelita's job is to be there for them, is to listen to them. A lot of times people are carrying things like this in the past, and they themselves need help. They themselves need somebody to talk to. Our Victims Assistance Coordinator is also there for them. One of the things that people may or may not know is not only since 2002 do we have structures to make sure that cover-up doesn't happen, but since 2002 we also have structures in place to help the families or the victims themselves with counseling so that they can also kind of take the next step in healing in their own life. And so all they would need to do is call the Victims Assistance Coordinator, and there's somebody there to walk them through their whole process.
And I think the most important thing we could reiterate tonight would be that we've heard of suicides over the years that may or may not be directly related, but there's been an association of abuse. And I'm not just saying in the Catholic Church, I'm talking about abuse in general. It's more than just the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
we can go to schools.
Sure.
We can go to other denominations. We can go anywhere, you're going to find abuse. I guess the key part is reaching out to those who are very fragile, who are saying, I don't want to live this anymore. They can seek help with the number you just mentioned, right?
Absolutely. Bishop Fobb just wants to make sure that people know that the Catholic Church has learned from those mistakes. So the release of names or the conversation that we would be entering into even publicly right now is to help restore trust, because we know that the sins of the past have affected people. If people themselves desire help, then the door is wide open for that conversation. If people who have been a victim desire counseling, then the door is wide open there. Right? So our Victims Assistance Coordinator is there to help people. It's our desire, you might say, to be involved in a conversation, and if people need help, just to let them know the door is wide open.
I know y'all have been at meetings in every Catholic diocese in the nation has been in meetings. In a way, all of this, and I'm not saying it'll ever be good for the victims, but in a way, doesn't it give the good diocese a chance to go, all right, let's put it out there and let's put our message out against some of the other ones and sort of clean up the myths or the folklore over the years or the legends. Or I'm sure you hear stuff sometimes where you're going, I heard something about a certain priest that never happened. Or you probably heard something about a priest and you know it happened. Gives you a chance to sort of clean up the playing field a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly gives us a chance to give people good information. And I remind people all the time that whether a diocese has multiple victims and multiple priests, or just one's too many. The sexual abuse of a child is unacceptable in no matter how many cases that are out there. And it's one thing to pray for people, it's another thing to take action and to clean things up. And so I think what this is forcing dioceses into is it's forcing them to fix the problem, and it's inviting them, if they want to, into a conversation with the public to let them know that we have fixed the problem. And I think that as I've listened to people who have said, well, we need to pray for the victims, I've also reminded them, yeah, we need to pray for the victims, and we need to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. Right? So we need action as well as prayer.
Yeah, stop the problem.
Exactly.
But I think you had a first-hand chance to see the problem it was creating for the church, because you were recruiting people to be priests.
Absolutely.
And you were going, okay, I want you to be a priest. And so I think that's probably where a lot of your passion comes from, in the fact that you said, wait a minute, we got to take care of our own house first. Was that part of the catalyst?
It was. I was invited into the vocations office in 2003, and I believe that everything with Boston went live in late 2001, early 2002. And so I entered into the vocations office, or the recruiting world, right on the heels of the sexual abuse that was made public in 2002. And it's tough to look at a parent and assure them that the life that their son is going to have as a priest is going to be filled with integrity unless we have taken care of things on our end. And so the screening of candidates, or a lot of the reform that we put in place across the nation, is in direct response to making sure that if we're going to move forward, we have to take care of things on our end.
Aunt Betty, somebody's Aunt Betty who's watching, might be 85 or 90. She's going, Martin, you shouldn't be asking that nice priest those questions. Then you got the younger generation. Yeah, I want to know what my altar boy girl, my altar boy is going through when they're on the altar or in the sacristy, or things of that nature. So as a reporter too, I have to answer to Aunt Betty and to the younger generation who wants to know. The slippery slope is everybody has a different want of how they want to see things posed. The older generation, that's the church. You don't mess with the church. Don't break the veil. Don't do it. And it's changed over the years. You've had to be cognizant of that, haven't you?
Absolutely. And so to Aunt Betty, I would say Martin should not have to ask the church, because Aunt Betty has a great respect for the church. And I would say that in order to maintain Aunt Betty's respect, we need to make sure that we act with integrity. So to Aunt Betty, no, Martin should not have to ask these questions. But he does, because we've broken that trust in the past and everything that's come forward. To the younger generation, I would say that they're not going to trust the church unless you ask the question. And so we have an obligation to both Aunt Betty and to the younger generation to take steps to restore trust. And you can't restore trust unless you take action, which is what we have done in our diocese and the U.S. bishops are trying to do, and unless you enter into a conversation with both Aunt Betty and the younger generation.
All right, we thank you for that answer, and we'll be back to wrap things up with the Vicar General, Father Mark Toups, as we are dealing with a very tough subject, and that's sexual abuse here in the local churches. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Bayou Time. Once again, my guest tonight is the Vicar General, the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux, Father Mark Toups. I've been having this conversation with every bishop since Bishop Boudreaux. And I don't cast aspersions on any of them, because they all handle it differently, or all had different crosses to bear themselves, or whatever. But I gotta say that now, I feel like I don't have to twist your arm, or Bishop Favre's arm. when I call and say, can you come on HTV and let's talk about this? Let's bring it to the public. There's no, well, let me consult with the attorneys. Let me do this, let me do that. And I guess my point is, Bishop Fobb has sort of turned you loose too. You can pretty much talk about what needs to be done.
Bishop Fobb's motto as a bishop, his episcopal motto, comes from the prophet Isaiah, and his episcopal motto is, comfort my people. So I can only speak on behalf of Bishop Fobb, as I'm working with him now, that he has a real desire to comfort people and to help them trust the church and to trust God in the process. And his style is I think, colored also by the fact that his early days as a bishop were also on the heels of Hurricane Katrina in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, where I think he, as a young bishop, was thrown into some very tough conversations. And I think he's learned what happens when you are transparent with people and you talk to people. So I think it comes from his motto and from his heart. And I love the diocese, and I love working with him.
Yeah. I guess it's tough for him too when a younger bishop in a younger diocese goes to meet with the older diocese and the older bishops and the grandfathers in the church, and they sort of want to construct how the press releases will go, how the things will go. Does he have a lot of say-so in how this is all going to go down? Does he have a big voice in that?
Well, the beauty is that every bishop really has some autonomy in the way that he administrates his own diocese. So one thing that I've learned about Bishop Fobb is he is very consultative. He does want to hear from lots of different people. I think he wants to get not only their opinion, but he wants to get into their mind with why they would express that opinion. But in the end, he's his own man. In the end, he's his own leader. And in the end, what we do here in Houma is not going to be dictated by other dioceses. I think he's going to make his own decision about what's best for the people of our diocese.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, this whole interview, it's no longer somebody comes in, there's an allegation against the priest, and the diocese goes in the double vault door, closes the door and says, make it go away. There's a lot more to it than that.
If somebody comes forward with an allegation of active abuse right now, with a child right now, the first phone call is to the police. I mean, so if there's active abuse going on with a minor right now, the first call is to the police, because that's the legal thing to do. There is no double vault there.
Well, you'd agree it hadn't always been done like that. The new policy is correct.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Police should be called.
Absolutely. And if there is information that's brought forward about abuse from the past when it was with a minor, but the person who was abused then is now an adult, there's no double vault secret meeting now. That's brought to our review board so that they can give consultation on what that is. So the church has learned from the mistakes of the past, and I think that as I listen to the media right now presenting cases from the 1960s and 70s, my heart breaks for those victims, because what happened was sinful and it was wrong. But it's important for people to also know that there are no double vault meetings now. Today, there's consultation with people who need to be in the loop, and it's brought to the police immediately if it's an active violation.
The past accusations become the present feeling of some. You can't never forget. You can't. So depending on how the media stirs it up, depends on, like I told you prior to the interview, I personally would never go chase down a victim and try to get their story on something like this if they didn't come forward first and want to tell their story, because they've changed their lives.
Sure.
And they've dealt with it, and they're so volatile. Bringing them out in the light could make them suicidal, could make them relive it again. So I think it's a cautious approach on both sides on how you handle the victims in this case.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the Victims Assistance Coordinator is so essential, to help people understand that there is a place for them to bring their heart, whether it's a formal allegation or whether it's just their own heart where they themselves need to work things out. So as I said earlier, that door is wide open. It is a sensitive topic. It's not one that's easy for the victims to hear, and it's not one that's easy for the church to enter into. But the church has an obligation, a moral obligation, to let people know that we have fixed the problems of the past. And certainly if there are people out there who are still struggling, that there are mechanisms in place where we can get them help so that they can receive the help that they need.
Yeah. And if they have knowledge or firsthand account of something that was bad,
of course,
bring it forward.
Absolutely.
And because they may want to clear their chest.
Absolutely.
A little bit.
And we're hoping that people hear that if anything is brought forward, that it's not going to be dusted away or put under the rug, that we have systems in place now with the Diocesan Review Board and the way that they serve the bishop, as well as this bishop right now, that he is committed to doing the right thing and making sure that we move forward without the mistakes of the past.
So I know the plan is, as soon as everybody's releasing names at a different pace.
Yeah.
California may be different than Louisiana. They're meeting on Louisiana. When that transpires and the names are to be released, the bishop's going to have a sit down with me, and he's going to talk about the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux.
Absolutely. He longs to have that conversation. His schedule is such that he wasn't able to have that conversation as fast as we wanted. So that's why I came, so that we could start the conversation. We didn't want to delay just because of the commitments that he has. I think it's important for people to know that all of the U.S. bishops are gathering in November, and this is going to be the #1 thing that they're talking about, because I think the U.S. bishops want to make this right also. Once Bishop Fobb has able to learn more about what we're going to do with the names, consult with other bishops, then he looks forward to sitting down with you. And I think not only just talking about the names and everything that's there, but talk about what it's like for him as a bishop, and what he has done as a bishop to make sure that we move forward together.
Because in looking at Bishop Fobb, he's going to move up pretty quick. That's my prediction.
Well, don't say that. We want to keep him right here forever.
I know, but I'm being a realist.
Yeah,
okay?
sure.
I think he's going to, but I appreciate your candidness and being upfront. That approach is really refreshing for us in the media. And sometimes me and you are friends, but we got to put the reporter, reportee kind of hat on, and we got to tell the truth about things. And you've always been good about doing that, and I certainly appreciate it. I think it's very refreshing, and I know the public appreciates it. And let's just get past this and help out the people that need to be helped. Let's get the church in order.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing that I think Bishop Fobb is committed to, is that I know that he wants to make sure that people can take steps in regaining trust in the church. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we bring things to the light. I told my own congregation at Christ Redeemer just a few weeks ago that if we don't exercise the courage, or if we don't tap into the courage to have this conversation together, then we're not going to be able to talk about other things. So this is where we are. This is where the Lord has us. We have to tackle this together, and I think that bringing it to the light is the only way to do that.
The good Padre.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you as always.
You got it, man.
Thank you, Father.